Hey ArtTube, thanks for stopping by. Today I'm going to do a painting of an American bison, starting with a blank sheet of watercolor paper, through the initial sketch, and then through the final painting of watercolor and gouache. I'll even include a link to the original photo. Stick around, won't you? Thanks for joining me today. I'm not going to waste any time. Let's just go ahead and dive right in. I'll throw the photo reference up in the upper left so that you can see what we're working on. The paper that I'm working on today is Arch's 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. Now when I do my sketch, I try and keep everything as simple as possible, especially when I'm doing watercolor. I start light and I go darker. I don't need a lot of detail, but I do need the lines to be in the right place. That's pretty important. Now, since this is a pretty small piece, it's a 5x7, I really don't need any more of a sketch than this. So let's get on to painting. So I'm just going to start with watercolor, and later as I move on to do the finishing details, I'm going to go ahead and do some gouache, opaque watercolor over the top. But for now, there's an indication of there being a mountain behind him. It really doesn't even need to read as a mountain. It could just be some kind of a design behind him. And the transition between where the grass is and where the mountain is going to be pretty subtle. For the ground that this big fella is standing on, I start with a wash of yellow ochre. And then I'll work in the sap green and some burnt sienna and let those two kind of play off of each other. You need to have the warm and the cool in there in order for it to look decent. So at this point, repeat after me. Details are bad, values are good. We'll get to those details in just a little while, but right now, you just want to make sure that everything is kind of sitting where it's supposed to, as far as the colors and the values, the lights and the darks. We'll always be able to add those details in, especially if we're using gouache. But right now, we just want to kind of lay this in. And you all know, if you've worked in watercolor, that it starts out, you'll put it down, and it'll look very dark, but as it dries, it'll dry a value or two lighter than what it is that you're painting. So if you put something down and it looks too dark, don't freak out. Just know that when you dry it, it's going to sit probably close to where it needs to be. So as I'm working on the front part of his dark shaggy fur, and this is my second pass, I'm using raw umber combined with burnt sienna. And you know, a lot of people think that the bison are black in the front, but they're actually just a dark brown. And when the light hits it right, you get a lot of blue that's reflected off of his fur when it's up towards the sky. And so right now I'm not worried so much about adding that cool in. I'm just trying to get the value down to where it needs to be so that it reads like that dark fur. I think if you're looking to practice watercolor and maybe gain a little bit of confidence, doing paintings that are this size, 5x7, 6x8, smaller ones, it's really going to loosen you up. You're going to approach it. You're not going to be so worried about investing all kinds of time in it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then you move on to the next one. But there's nothing to fear on doing these little ones because you know, you invest so little time in them, and they really can sparkle. They can be little gems for you, and you can learn so much while doing them. And put that fear of oh gee, what if I do this behind you, because that's the only way that we learn. And so, anyways, I would really encourage you to do that. Take that step, whether it's a still life or a wildlife or a landscape. something like this is just going to make you better as an artist. And really, for us to get better, all of us, it's just about brush mileage, just the experience of sitting down and putting the time in. And we can do that, right? I mean, that's the easy part. That's the fun part. As I'm working with the gouache in here, you'll notice that I'm mixing the warms and the cools in the dark part of the bison's head and his shoulders. And I'm just slowly starting to add details and get the values to where they should be, the highlights and then the shadows that are underneath him. But don't try and do it all at once. I'm just kind of slowly creeping up on it, and as I see something pop up that needs to be fixed or needs to be adjusted, then I go ahead and jump in and do that. And basically I'm doing that until I don't see anything else that I feel like needs to be corrected. I like to always stop a little bit before I feel like I should, and that way I don't overwork things. Now you might notice when I'm working with the gouache, I'm not putting it down as a thin layer and a real smooth look. I'm actually putting it down with little dabs, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, I like the look better, and two is it mimics his fur a little bit more. And so I just I take my time and I put it down so that it feels right. And so now it's really just basically a matter of working it back and forth until I get the level of detail and the look that I want. The great thing about gouache is it's kind of like oils in that you're not done until you say you're done. You know, I actually do, now that I think about it, I kind of think of my gouache and watercolor paintings, I treat them a lot like I would my oils, in that the watercolor is kind of my underpainting, and then the gouache is, is the finishing layer, as though it were my oil paints. So there is some overlap there, although they handle completely differently. And we're coming down the home stretch now. I'm working on transition areas from one color to another color, and adding details in where I need them in highlights. This is the time to be adding your highlights at the very end, working in grasses that will stand out a little bit more than others, and just making sure that nothing slaps you in the face when you look at it. One of my favorite parts of any painting is to be able to pull that tape off, step back and see the painting cleanly for the first time. It's just such a great feeling. For a quick recap, let's talk about the drawing. You work light to dark and don't sweat the details in the beginning. Keep it simple. For your colors, you go light to dark and you do the details only after you get your values and your colors solid. If you do this, you're going to be successful more often than not. Anyways, thanks for stopping by. I sure do appreciate it. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't, but you like what you saw, please subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you want to be kept up to date. And as always, we'll see you down the road.